famous alcohol. And we've got lots to talk about, so stick around. We will be right back. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I don't think you need much introduction, Christopher, because you are all over the place as shochu expert. But I think one thing we haven't heard so much from you is about Awamori. And I listened to a great podcast you did on Sake on Air.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you guys were talking about this, how there really isn't much talked about or online, especially in English, about Awamori. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Joy.
That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your background. You originally from Vermont?
Yeah, that's right. Bristol, Vermont, born and raised. Spent 18 years of my life there and kind of got into the alcohol business while I was living there as part of a school project where I was focused on prohibition. A very close friend of mine and I started homebrewing, which is not completely above board, but we learned a lot about, making really delicious drinks in small batches, kind of by hand.
And in your bathtub? Really like where did you?
It was in the kitchen, and then we actually we did use the bathtub. You know what we did?
Yeah.
Because we would fill it with ice to cool down the wort, the boiled, basically when we were cooking the beer, and we needed to cool it down relatively quickly. And so we did use a bathtub full of ice in order to do that.
At one point in my childhood, my dad made beer in our bathtub, so we were not allowed to use the bath for, I think it was a few weeks.
But I making a lot of beer.
Yeah, he was. I looked up the breweries, craft breweries in Vermont, and which one did you say that you were working at?
Okay. So I turned my home brewing experiment into an apprenticeship at Otter Creek Brewing in Middlebury, Vermont.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that on my list on Google Maps, but I was surprised how many. I love that about America. There's so many craft beer places. And I think I get the feeling that shochu is kind of like that in Japan. That you get the same craft beer mentality from fans of different shochu places. Do you get that feeling that it's kind of comparative?
Yeah, I mean there's a very strong sense of terroir and craft and regionality in these industries. So absolutely, people have their favorites. There's a lot strong regional fan bases. Absolutely.
Yeah, and when I was thinking about it, like what makes a difference between shochu and Awamori and sake, and I think this came up a lot when I was doing research for this talk, is sake is, in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong, sake is kind of at the level of wine in terms of kind of higher level, refined. Shochu Awamori is more of a normal person, or like a craft type level. Is that kind of the
That's
right
a very
feeling?
interesting corollary, and it's one actually that I used in my book. It often felt to me when I came to Japan that Awamori and shochu were always kind of left out of the conversation in fine dining situations, much like craft beer always was back in the 90s when I was really a part of it. Despite the fact that there's so much diversity, and even despite the fact that there's so much quality, it really just was kind of a default, like, well, okay, we're having a sophisticated meal, let's go for Nihonshu, let's go for sake. Where you might do something similar in the States or in Europe with wine.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I would love to see done with sake as well as shochu in Japan to make it more accessible, more part of a traveler's experience.
Right.
I think the image is shochu and awamori and even sake is kind of a local's drink. And I got this idea when I talked to Stephen Lyman, your partner in crime,
Hmm.
that it's so much of shochu, especially, is very domestic market. Like very little is exported, and maybe awamori is even more so. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. Less than 1% of shochu is exported. And, more shochu and awamori are produced in Japan than tequila in Mexico.
Wow, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah. About 70% of tequila is exported. Less than 1% of shochu and awamori enjoy the same trip across the water.
Wow. Well, I'm showing your excellent Shochu handbook on the screen right now,
Oh,
and
cheers.
it's really good. I've been reading the Kindle version, so I got a bit of information about Awamori in there as well. How long did it take you to write the book?
It was a process. So the book was born out of my desire to just bring the message of these drinks to a wider audience. And I went through about three different versions of the manuscript. Maybe it was even four. And at some point, I finally asked myself, who's going to read this? I'm just some nerd who fell in love with these drinks, but I don't have any qualifications to speak of. So who's going to, where's my platform? So then I kind of stopped the process. I figured out that you could actually get certified by the SSI here in Japan as a Shochu Kikisake shi. And I started studying for that. Of course, that was in a language that I could not read or write. The process took several years off of my life, but I did get that qualification. And as soon as I had done that, I went back to the manuscript and I said, this is not good enough. So I restarted again and then finally got that finished in 2014. So it took a few years, but it
Wow.
was a great process. It's a lovely learning process. You learn as much about yourself as you do about anything else. And I'm excited to hopefully do it again soon.
Yeah, well, excellent. And I mean, with all your touring around Japan and the world talking about shochu and awamori, you must be collecting so many wonderful stories, which you do put on your blog, which I have put on the link below. Um,
Cheers.
and it would be great to put it into another book sometime
Yep,
too.
absolutely. And so are you showing shochu.pro? Is that what's on the screen
Uh,
right now, or is it Kanpai?
under the, I can put links later too.
Okay, that's fine.
Which
I wanted
one?
to give a shout out to Kanpai as well because
Okay.
Kanpai is a really good website for information about shochu and awamori, and it's very consumer facing. Whereas my website shochu.pro is a little bit more trade facing.
Okay, awesome. Well, we will make sure that both of those links are below once this is housed on YouTube.
Got it.
Um, so you did the qualification, and it is called a shochu sommelier. Is that right?
That's how it's often translated. I know that wine folks probably won't be very pleased with that word being hijacked, and so if you cannot compare that qualification to being a master som or something like that. There's not nearly as much work that goes into it or as much expertise, but it is at least as far as these things go, it's one of the harder ones to get. And there is an actual tasting on the exam. It's a blind tasting, and I think that's one of the key points is, okay, can you actually pick these things out? Can you tell the difference between a sweet potato, a barley, a kokuto, all side by side? Can you find the one that's spiked that smells like it's gone off a little bit? Because they do actually put a little bit of oil in it, and you're supposed to find that one before you put it in your mouth. You're
Oh,
supposed to just get it by nose, and if you don't get
wow.
it on the nose, you will get it when you start to swish it around because it's pretty pungent.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I am not to the level that you guys were talking about for sake on air. You guys had a lot of terminology and stuff that I'm not sure I'm going to dive into, but I will definitely send people to that episode if you
Cheers.
want all the technical details because you
Mhm.
you had some experts on that show with you, and it was really interesting. But a lot just went straight over my head. Now,
Well,
what
thank you for listening, though.
what I found really interesting researching about Awamori is all the cultural stuff, which is
Yeah.
so interesting and distinct when compared to shochu or sake. It's a really unique drink.
hmm
Yeah.
You're totally right. And it's technically Shochu's uncle or aunt or at least older relative. It's Japan's first spirit, really. I mean, at the time when it was made, of course, the Okinawan Islands were known as the Ryukyu Kingdom, which was not part of Japan. But, I guess if we are a little bit fast and loose with our start and stop of these different boundaries then and borders, then we can say that it is actually Japan's native spirit. Awamori, we're not exactly sure when it first started being made in Okinawa, but we're pretty sure it was sometime in the 1400s, maybe the early 1400s. It's been around for a long, long time. It's not some kind of trendy thing that Dentsu came up with as a way to revive a local industry. This is Okinawa's spirit, and it is what gave birth later to the shochu traditions that are more common or incredibly common in Kyushu today. The difference, of course, between sake and shochu and awamori is that shochu and awamori are spirits. They're relatively low alcohol content spirits, but they are distilled. So they're in the same family as the gins, the whiskeys, the tequilas, the brandies of the world. But they're different. They're interesting because one key difference between shochu and awamori and most other spirits that we've heard of before is that shochu and awamori are only distilled once in a pot still, and that's rare. And that means that they're also kind of difficult to make because the more times you distill, the more flavor you peel off of the liquid.
Right.
Which means that if you have an inferior fermented mash, meaning it smells nasty, that's fine. You can get rid of that by repeatedly distilling it. And then you get also a higher alcohol content. So the trick with this single pot distillation style, this traditional Japanese style, is that you have to have a really delicious fermented mash in order to create a delicious final product. That's the tough part, and that's one of the many things that make awamori and shochu so special.
Yeah, it was interesting that you're talking about distillation because you talked about one company which you wanted to explain more in detail. Really interesting company, Yoka Koji,
Okay,
which
sure.
you said they had distilled over 4 days, which made it a much stronger flavor than usual, or something.
Okay, so this is by a company called Chuko, and actually I have a bottle of Yokka Koji right here. Yokka Koji is this really it's really kind of iconic, actually, this label. And it's made by Chuko, which is not too far from downtown Naha on the main island of Okinawa. And it's Yokka, meaning 4 days, Koji being Koji, of course. And it means that it takes 4 days to make the Koji. Now, standard in the sake, shochu, awamori world is a 2-day Koji. So they nearly double the process. And the flavors and aromas that result are bonkers. So it's a really, really fun, it's a really delicious. Also, it's higher proof than most awamori and shochu. This is 86 proof, meaning 43% alcohol. So it's got a little going on, but it's a very, very interesting product. So I'm gonna pour this right now just to have it out
Yeah.
and let it air out a little bit.
Well, it
Um,
was when I was researching these companies that you sent me that you wanted to talk about. This was the most interesting one to me because they had so much going on their website. Now,
yeah.
in terms of sustainability, and you were talking in your episode, your podcast, about how the rice for awamori is actually Thai rice. It comes from Thailand. It's not from Japan.
Right.
So when you first think of that, you're like, oh, well, it's not sustainable because it's not made from Japanese rice. But wait. It's using techniques to make the pots, to make the awamori, which is perpetuating heritage and culture. It is definitely something that we want to support in terms of sustainability, something we want to keep as part of Okinawan heritage. And I saw that so much on this website because they are doing some very interesting things to try to keep loyal customers. Now, I'm sure you know about this. When a baby is born, they have something where you can put the baby's footprint on one of their bottles because it's an aged bottle. So then when the baby is 20 years old, and you can have the baby's footprint until they're 20 years old and then drink it together. When you have a wedding, you have different families at the wedding pouring into ceramic container, which they're going to close and drink at a later date. So the whole concept of aged awamori has a lot of interesting connections to community and heritage and family that I'd never even considered before. So what an interesting company.
It is a fascinating company, and they are also, this is one of their pots that's they make this style of pottery at the distillery. So they have kilns in the distillery. It's amazing. It's called Gusukuyaki, and a lot of the time it'll get this kind of scorched outer pattern to it because the flames come so close to the actual clay. And it's a really cool local style. You can see that this one that I have in my hands was bottled in 2007, and this is an unglazed pot. So there's been some, interaction. There's some light oxidation going on here. It takes on a very mellow, very interesting personality. And again, single distilled. So you get the flavors and the aromas from the original ingredients, the koji as it was made at that time in that distillery, and it's really a fascinating and diverse drink. The one thing that is really cool about aged awamori is that you do often get a lot of vanilla notes, and you get a lot of you get some deep soy notes, and you get some other kind of fun sweet notes in there too that develop over time. One thing, I don't know if you saw this, there's a style of aging in the awamori world which is called Shiitsugi. And Shiitsugi is basically, I guess the closest thing you could compare it to is in the sherry world, where they have soleras. And a solera is where you take one vintage and you blend it with the next, and you blend that one with the next, and it creates this continuity between vintages of the drink. They do the same thing in Okinawa. You might have 10 different vintages in a row in separate pots. And when you want to drink with your family, you pour from the oldest one, and then you refill from the next oldest one. You refill all the way down the line. So you're getting this continuity that reaches back perhaps generations. And that's another thing that's about the community and bringing people together.
And then also tying that in with the artisans who make the pots. And then that website as well was showing how the clay is really important. And you want the clay to add to the flavor over time. And that reminded me of bizen in Okayama and bizen yaki, and how they say it adds to the quality of water that you drink from it, or the tea or whatever. And so over time, this purity of the soil that went into making the pot is very important, and you can reuse it and have that wonderful flavor over and over again over time. I thought that was really beautiful.
It's a really cool thing. And there's one place where you can go and learn a lot about the pottery in Okinawa is in Yomitan, and they make, I picked up this dachi bean there. This is a traditional pot it's rounded. You can see it's rounded, and you carry it with you. It's rounded so that it fits along your waist, and so that you can carry it with you, and when it's time for a break, you just pour off a little bit and pour off a little for your friend, and this is a very cool traditional thing. The other
That's really cool. It's like a what is it? Deer skin? in
Almost
America,
like
the
that.
cowboys.
It's a deer skin that you can knock somebody out with if they get too if they get too uppity with
A
you.
porcelain deerskin.
This actually, I don't know why I didn't think of this before. This is pottery from Chuko. I don't know if you can see it. It has like this scorched thing
Yeah,
here,
yeah, I see
and
that.
you can see it. And this is a karakara, and this is one of my favorite little things that you get in izakaya sometimes. There's a little ball inside, and the ball makes a sound once you've consumed all the awamori. So there's nothing left. You can hear that. And so nobody can pretend pour for you. And if you need to let somebody know that you need a refill, pretty simple.
Wow,
So this is
that's
a this
pretty
is a
clever.
traditional karakara.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
I haven't seen that before.
fill it up on the top and then pour for each other,
So,
usually in small cups.
so is it just like a ceramic, a piece of pottery inside the
That's
bowl?
right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Yep.
Wow,
It
that's
is.
funny.
Yeah. And so it's very cool. Another thing in terms of vessels, Okinawan glass is a big thing. I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead
No,
here.
no, go ahead.
No. This is another beautiful way to enjoy awamori, usually on the rocks or with mizuwari with some water to cut it, and yeah, just beautiful glass done in Okinawa. To be fair, a lot of the glass that's available, if you're a tourist, it actually is imported glass. It's not actually made in Okinawa. So you definitely have to search for the homegrown stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, lots of fun ways to
Check the
enjoy the
labels.
drink.
It's important.
That's true.
Another interesting thing I saw on that website was they had loads of cocktail recommendations, cocktail menu,
Hmm.
and one of the cocktails is my nemesis in
Okay.
Okinawa. Can you
What's that?
guess? I challenge eating it every year, every summer, and I just can't eat it. I hate it.
Oh, is it
But
the tofuyo?
no, it's
Oh,
something, it's a vegetable from Okinawa that is
okay.
the
Okay.
secret to beauty and longevity, Goya.
It's Goya. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And I grow it outside my house every day, every summer because it's a beautiful green screen.
Okay.
And I try to eat it and I saw it in one of the cocktails. And I thought, oh, I don't know about it in a cocktail, but who knows? I've tried Goya and loads of different things. It's hard to eat, but it's so good for you.
It is definitely good for you. And Chuko is thinking very internationally here with the cocktail play.
Yeah.
And Yoka Koji is 43% and has a lot of character. This you can mix and it won't get overrun by the other ingredients in the cocktail. Whereas some other styles of shochu and awamori, which are bottled at lower proofs, they might get overwhelmed.
Now
Um,
this is something that I think Stephen mentioned in the talk that shochu is actually, and maybe awamori as well, is becoming more popular, but
mhm.
sake is becoming less popular.
Okay, so
Is that
I
true?
would say, are you talking about domestically or internationally?
I think, well, I mean, sake is so much more exported and
Yeah,
shochu's not. So
not
maybe
yet.
just domestically, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, shochu sales are not exact, or before this year, they were not increasing. They were very stagnant. You might be losing a point or two every year, but they were kind of holding steady, and sake's had a slightly harder go of it. This year, I think, because so many people are just drinking at home, I don't think that the sales have been that horrible for at least a lot of the well-known brands. And but there's been pain, of course. But yeah, sake is killing it internationally. They're growing in double digits year on year, and probably that will be true again for 2020. Shochu is just getting started. It hasn't really found any recognition overseas yet, and that goes for awamori as well.
Wow, interesting. It's interesting how, well, sake has a longer history of being exported and being a focus of international cuisine pairing and that kind of thing,
Sure.
right?
Hmm.
But
Absolutely.
do
Yeah,
you see that potential for awamori as well as shochu?
absolutely. There's just got to be a little bit more education in terms of preparing new markets for these products, and already there's much better name recognition than there was even just 5 years ago. You can go to shows, trade shows or different exhibitions internationally, and people hear the word Awamori or they hear the word shochu and they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of this. I'm curious. I want to learn more. Whereas 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people would have been like, huh? What is that? Is that sake? And you're like, no, this is a different Japanese drink. And they're like, no, thank you. I'll go drink something else. So it's getting better. I think the ground is fertile. It's ready for this to happen. It's just going to take a lot more concerted effort from the makers involved to get the word out and to do it in a way that is tuned to the intended audience. And that's not something that's been done very competently up to this point.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Before this talk today, I did go out and try to get one.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't have any success at Costco. Costco had lots of shochu, lots of sake, and then lots of imported wines, but no awamori. And then I went to a specialty liquor shop, and they only had 3 awamori, but I was really happy to find one. So it's not as easy to get, right, as shochu.
Well, you're right. It's a small segment of the industry, and places tend to either have the massive brands or they tend to have nothing at all. And you were lucky because you seem to have a really good purveyor of fine drinks in your vicinity, and you got Harusame.
Yeah. So tell me about this one, because I'm gonna pour some over ice with water because it's 30 proof, and I have to continue the interview.
Yeah. Okay. I'll pour one too. I'm gonna find one that's 30 proof. I've got my
Okay, great. So
big,
that is an
right
interesting thing. It's 30 to 40 is the average for awamori, is it?
30% is standard for awamori. 30%. Now, you can of course find higher proof, and I showed you one that was 43, which is basically an undiluted awamori. But most typically it's bottled at 30%. And 30% it's got enough going on that you could enjoy it neat if you were so inclined. But it will also knock you on your butt if you have too much of it too quickly.
Yeah, I bet. It doesn't smell too strong, like just smelling it. The guy at the store, he was really knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying I should notice hints of vanilla and no strong aftertaste.
Yeah, Harusame is very, very well respected for being a really smooth, light sipper. And I think if you have it on the rocks, or even mizuwari at about a 50-50 ratio, you're going to knock it down to 15% alcohol, and then you're in wine territory, and sake territory for that matter. So I'm also drinking a 30% ABV. Mine's coming from a pot that I keep here.
Beautiful.
This is Ryukyu Ocho, and
Ryukyu was another company you wanted to talk about, right? So if you buy it in bottles and you have a container, a ceramic container like you have, would you pour it into the ceramic to keep it longer?
You absolutely could. I think, and if you do some home aging, you're gonna get a more interesting product, because the interaction with the clay, whatever that happens to be made out of, will impart some flavor over time. It'll take a while though. I mean, you're gonna have to give it a year or two. And then if you're a kind of a nerd like me, then you might have several pots in front of you. I've got this guy right here that's ready to be filled.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, this is another one from Chuko. Actually, I have a lot of Chuko pottery here, actually.
Have you visited the factory, the distillery?
I have. Oh yeah, and it's a great place to tour if you're ever in Okinawa. It's really set up to bring in visitors, and they've got a great tasting room. They've got a members cellar where you can buy your pot and they'll age it for you downstairs, and then they can either ship it to you at whenever you think it's time to open it, or you can go back and collect it yourself. And like you said, the little baby footprint, there's a lot of stuff like that down there, and they're very, very customer oriented. It's a wonderful place to go, not to mention the fact that you can see the potters at work in the distillery itself.
Now, is it like Brian Ashcraft mentioned about sake that he really feels like it's the brewers of sake that really make the difference? It's not the technique, it's not the timing, it's not the technical stuff. It's how good the actual toji is, the brewer is. Do you feel that that's true also for Awamori and shochu?
I think it's absolutely true for the smaller distilleries where the toji, her or himself, has so much input into the decisions that are made, and we're not talking about computers making those decisions or a panel full of gauges. It's absolutely down to the intuition of the person that's overseeing the process. So yes, the toji skill is absolutely essential. And you'll notice, and many people have noticed, when tojis move on, when they decide not to do that job anymore, they move to a different distillery, many times the spirit will change in their absence.
Wow. So you have that in Japan a lot for traditional cultural things, like pottery, any artisan craft. You've got the internship, what do you call it, apprenticeship
Yeah.
system. Is that the same for Awamori and shochu?
Yes, there's absolutely a long-winded process that goes into grooming someone to take over as a toji. But honestly, these days the toji guild system is not nearly as strong as it used to be. You used to have different guilds that embodied different styles of fermentation, and they would basically lend their members out, or not lend them out, they would be hired out to oversee production at different facilities during the brewing and distilling season. But these days that's not really as influential as it used to be, and there's a lot more just simple nepotism that goes on, and basically it's something that's handed down from generation to generation, and it takes a long time to coach someone into having the instincts and the attention to detail to be able to create the same product from varying, a starch source that varies in quality and in volume from year to year. It's a really difficult, intuitive process that requires a real craftsperson.
Mm. And I remember Stephen talking about how most shochu breweries or distilleries are family run,
Yes,
very small businesses.
that's right.
Is that the same for Aomori?
That's the same for Awamori. It's really it's become a very small, and there's only about 4 dozen distilleries these days that are remaining. And while there is one big cooperative, most of them are just one-offs that are the remnants of a industry that used to be much larger. And they are, in many cases, run by families. And you get some that are so small that it's only 1 or 2 people running them. And they're doing every single part of the process, from preparing the koji to applying the labels and putting them in boxes by hand. It's a really remarkable industry that is very much community based and very focused on the locality that the distillery calls home. And that's one thing that makes it very easy to start to become a fan for some of these places. Now, if I'm comparing, if I'm the 3 distilleries that I was planning on talking about today, the first one being Chuko, and then the second one with the beautiful pot is Taragawa, and then the third one, which I haven't mentioned yet, is a really big distillery. It's is Higa, and they make Zanpa White.
Mm-hmm.
These are all relatively large outfits, medium to large, and they have the people power and the resources to really get their message out there in a way that many of the small folks don't. So I think while these are excellent introductions, anyone who wants to become more interested in Awamori should absolutely pay attention to some of the little guys, some of the ones who, they might not really want you to visit because they don't know how to they don't have the people to deal with visitors. but they make beautiful products that are really they're really part of the story of that community.
I feel that, I mean, we're in Hiroshima, so
Mhm.
we are right next to Saijo, which is a famous sake
Oh, of
brewery
course.
area. And in terms of tourism, we are often consulting or trying to help, but the breweries are run, they're such small businesses, and they're usually
Yeah,
family run, and so they open when they like, or they close when they like. They
fair
don't
enough.
feel like staying open, they're not going to stay open. But
Yep.
if you're trying to make a map or trying to send people there regularly, that's a bit difficult, right? But
Yeah.
this is the way it is. So if you go to one and it's open, just feel really lucky because it's not always open.
Yep. That's absolutely
um,
true.
One of the ideas that I had in terms of sustainability as well is you have those great streets with all the classic houses, with the brew houses, with all the crisscross pattern, right? And
Hmm.
they're gorgeous streets, but often nobody's there to sell you anything. So
Right.
even if people visit and nothing's open, one of my ideas was that they would have vending machines, and you buy a little choki. Is it called a choki? A little cup.
Yeah.
You
I mean that
you buy
there's a
one
bunch of different names for them, but yes.
You buy one, and
Choki.
then you can go down and have a little taste at each brewery along the lane and pay maybe 50 yen in a vending machine that just gives you the sake. So you don't need the extra containers and the waste and everything. And then
Yeah.
that would be a way for them to get some money, right?
I think that's a great
So,
idea. We've seen it work very well with in the sake world. I mean, you can do that at ski resorts. You can do it at train stations. You can do it in different places. I don't think I've seen it with Awamori before, but it would be very cool to have that. One thing that I thought was a little bit one thing I've been pushing is to have at Naha Airport to have just a tasting corner for Awamori where they're just here, try this sample. And I find that a little bit like that's a missed opportunity.
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not gonna say
Oh,
it's an
for
own
sure.
goal, but it's definitely a missed opportunity to, introduce some people on the way out at least and say, hey, this is something we're very proud of. It's something that's been around for a long time, and it's something that helps to create a situation where people from Okinawa live longer than just about anywhere else in the country, and for that
Yeah.
matter, in the world. So
Yeah,
there's
for
something
sure.
to it.
And have the samples, but also something that we recommend in tourism as well, because we have Hiroshima is making gin as well. This bottle as well. If I'm traveling, I'm not going to buy a bottle this size. Like you need the
Mini
small
bottle, small
little
ones. Okay.
little mini travel bottles, and then people will
180s.
give it as a souvenir.
Sure.
I mean, talk about price though. Holy cow, this is really reasonable. Same as shochu.
Awamori and shochu are criminally underpriced. And
Really?
yeah, now it doesn't stay that way when they travel overseas. Of course, it'll be a 300% difference in many cases, but that's also down to the number of hands that are involved in getting those products overseas plus taxation. And so overseas, these products automatically become something that's very, it's something that you're going to have when it's a special occasion, perhaps when you're out with friends, when you want to impress people at a house party. And it's really interesting because that's very different from how these drinks have been associated with at least how they've been enjoyed in Japan for so long. Were for the longest time blue collar drinks and drinks that were largely confined to the southern islands of Japan. And it wasn't until basically the 80s, 90s, and within the last 20 years that particularly the smaller makers, got more recognition in the big cities. And we're talking about Osaka, Yokohama, Tokyo, and that demand really kind of put these drinks on the map for the first time, even though they've been around for hundreds of years. And I think that's a situation where the association with this old style, this old drinking culture, has not really fully seeded ground in terms of pricing to the quality that's available and what people are willing to pay for it. And I think people here are just really price sensitive, and they think, my grandfather used to drink shochu, and I'm not going to pay 3,000 yen a bottle for that. It just doesn't compute for people here, even though the margins being made by the makers are so criminally razor thin that, if you actually cared about these people and their livelihood and how much effort goes into producing these beautiful products, you should be happy to pay a little bit more. At least give them half of what it's worth, rather than, forcing them to keep on selling at prices that haven't changed that much since the 90s,
Yeah. And I find it really, it's more similar to me than whiskey, right? Because you can keep it for a long time. It's different from the idea of fresh sake and drinking it quickly, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like the ceramic one that you showed just a minute ago, on the website it says that's 5,000 yen. But you could drink that for a long time, right?
Oh yeah, it's a spirit. So yep, as long as it doesn't suffer any light damage, which it won't inside of this pot, then you could just kind of leave it half open for decades, and it'll change in flavor because of interaction with the clay, but it's not going to spoil. It's not going to turn into vinegar. So yeah, it's something that's nice about spirits in general. And Awamori is all about aging and all about clay, and turning this really umami rich product, which anything made with koji is just going to have these layers of character and flavor and aroma, and then allowing that to interact with the vessel. And in the whiskey world, of course, you have that with oak, and for what because of certain international issues from decades ago, you're not allowed to have a extensive oak or wooden aged spirit that gets too dark. So it's similar, but it's a very, very unique way of aging, I'd have to say.
Yeah, it's to me it just seems so interesting how different it is once I started reading about it and researching for this talk, how the idea of sake and putting I forgot what it's called, but putting the green ball in front of the
The
shop, sugidama, and then as that ball turns brown, the sake is a little bit older and you should drink fresh sake, right? And then turning that on its head for Awamori, and how keep it for longer. So in terms of giving as a gift, it's kind of like a gift that keeps on giving. I don't know.
Sure.
I like that idea.
Yeah, and the different manners of aging these pots. I mean, there's a bunch of places in Okinawa where you can go down into these limestone caves where they're aging these pots in this incredibly well-regulated temperature. And it's just a really interesting style that's a throwback to centuries past, and a connection to that history, even though honestly there is no literal connection anymore due to the Battle of Okinawa. Basically, the city was leveled before the war. Almost all Awamori production was conducted within sight of Shuri Castle that was mandated by the government. And so once when was it, the 1944, 45, and just boom, all gone. So the Awamori industry revived after that, but it really was, most of those companies didn't really have a connection to that past, and everybody is working so hard to just remember that and to keep it alive. And I think that's a really cool thing about Awamori and how it's so central to life and community in Okinawa.
That is really cool. And so Awamori is only made in Okinawa.
Okay, I love that comment because you're 95% of the way there. Ryukyu Awamori.
Okay.
Ryukyu Awamori is only made in Okinawa. And Ryukyu Awamori is the GI, the geographical indication, that is granted by the WTO to protect these super regional products. Scotch can only be made in Scotland, for instance. That's a GI. Ryukyu Awamori has the same international protection. If you try to
Okay.
make the exact same product with the same ingredients, the same process, same everything, but you're doing it in Vermont, and you try to call it Ryukyu Awamori, your business is going to suffer from some outside pressures, I guess what we'll say.
So if
Um,
it's made outside of Okinawa or the Ryukyu area,
yeah,
you have to only call it Awamori. Is that
it
right?
could be called Awamori.
It
That's
could be,
correct.
but not
And
Ryukyu Awamori.
that's
Okay.
correct. You cannot add Ryukyu. And they have a little symbol that they put on the back of many bottles just to show that this is made in the time-honored style according to very well-established practices and a set of rules. One of the rules being black koji only. And there's three main families of koji that are used to turn starches into sugars. In the sake world, many people will know that yellow koji, or Aspergillus oryzae, is the main saccharification agent. In the shochu world, they use pretty much all three. Standard is white koji. They use a lot of black koji as well these days, but yellow koji has become a little more popular because it tends to add more floral and sweeter notes. But in Okinawa, making Ryukyu Awamori, you're only allowed to use black. And that's one of the hoops you have to jump through in order to get that Ryukyu Awamori GI.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a really noob question right now.
I love it.
What is the difference between yeast and mold?
Excellent. Okay. So these two guys, they're friends and they work together. And the really unique thing about this, and this is a very Japanese thing, the unique thing is that they literally work together at the same time in the same location. Now, when you're making beer, as your dad did in the bathtub and I did in the kitchen and also use the bathtub, you use yeast first. No. You use, actually, yeast is second because some other company has already turned these barley grains into little sugar balls for you, and that's called malting. And that process right there is a 1-2 step that are very separated geographically and in terms of time. They almost never happen in the same place. Shochu, Aomori, sake, mirin, miso, everything that uses koji has this other really cool thing, which is where you get the koji to work away at basically taking over the malting process. We're not going to call it malt. It's not malt, but it does the same thing. It chops starches into glucose or fermentable sugars. In the same pot, you have the yeast waiting for the scissors to cut all the starches into glucose, and they're like, "Thank you very much. I will eat that sugar, and I'm going to give these weird humans what they want, which is alcohol. And I'm going to also, in the process, excrete a whole bunch of carbon dioxide and heat, which they better keep control of the heat, because if it gets too hot in here, I'm going to die and not make any more alcohol." But they work together. So the mold and the yeast, two different organisms, are working side by side to do these two steps of the process in tandem. And it's sometimes referred to as multiple parallel fermentation. Never happens in beer and whiskey making, let me tell you. I've oversimplified the crap out of that, but it's really endemic. It's really important to Japanese cuisine, culinary culture. If you don't have koji and yeast working together like they do here, you don't have Japanese food.
So with sake, you can have a non-alcoholic version, amazake, right?
Yes.
With Awamori, can you?
Awamori.
Can you?
You can't. I mean, you can. The problem is that the yeast that they use to make alcoholic drinks is really good at making alcohol. So you could theoretically cook the alcohol out of it. You can do that. But if you just leave it as is, it's going to have alcohol in it. So even, I guess soy sauce even has trace amounts of alcohol just because
Right.
yeast tends to be good at that. So you would need to, you're going to, if you're making awamori, you have alcohol.
Right.
So non-alcoholic awamori. I don't think I've seen that before. I've seen one non-alcoholic shochu. I'm not entirely sure how they did it. I think Komasa Distillery up in Kagoshima made one. I'm not sure if they still make it, but
Because I've made umeshu, and
uh-huh.
it's very easy instead of adding liquor to just add sugar or vinegar, and then you have a non-alcoholic version. I know it's a much more complicated process. I'd love to get somebody talking about umeshu someday if you can recommend someone.
I,
Awesome.
yeah, the umeshu often is made with sake, so has alcohol,
Oh.
and then often made with basically it's also called shochu, but it's not the type of shochu that we like. Ooh, maybe I don't know if I should. I'm sure some people like it. It's basically a modern version of shochu. It uses a modern still, a column still, which is the same still that's used to make vodka. So normally when people say, "Oh, shochu and awamori are basically Japanese vodka," I want to kick them in the shins because that there's nothing that can be further from the truth. They're made in a pot still, except for within the last 100 years, this new style, this modern style, came into existence when the column still arrived in Japan, and it allows for basically a nearly pure ethanol, 96 point something percent alcohol that has no character to it other than the aroma, the strong aroma of ethanol, and is watered down to 25% so that you can make umeshu at home, right? And that's sometimes called white liquor. It's sometimes called brewer's alcohol, and you can get it in the supermarket. And it's essential for making the kajitsushu, which I don't know if you do. You do that at home. We've made strawberry liqueur. We've made tea, coffee. Got a bunch of little jars aging away, macerating, and it's a great hobby.
It
And
is.
there's
It's a
nothing better
fun
than bringing
hobby.
something
Yeah.
homemade like that to a house party or a dinner
Yeah.
party and say like, "Here's a bottle of something I made. Enjoy." And they're like,
Yeah.
"You made this?"
Yeah.
It's a great present.
Always, always good. Getting back to Awamori a little bit.
Sure.
So the one I'm having, very easy to drink, very light. I'm really enjoying it with a bit of water. What is the taste variation from
Uh,
style to style?
Excellent question. Now, more to keep talking about stills. Uh, since about probably the 1970s, I guess, in the shochu world, anyways, they started using what's known as vacuum distillation. Now, when you use a normal pot still, and this is going back to your days in chemistry class in high school potentially, but basically you take the fermented mash, you heat it, and as long as it stays under the temperature of what water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius, if you keep the temperature of that mash under there, at a certain point below 100 degrees, it's actually closer to 78, the the alcohol will release, vaporize, and float out of the mash. So you can separate it. Now, in a typical pot still, that will happen at atmospheric pressure. In a vacuum still, if you create a vacuum in there, you can lower the temperature at which the alcohol evaporates and is separated from the fermentation. That also means that everything else that releases is just kind of treated in a lighter manner, I think, to radically oversimplify. It's a really soft, light, soft boil of the fermented mash. What happens then is that you get a lot more fruit, floral character on the mash. Now, one of the three that I'm nosing and sipping right now, this Zanpa White, a relatively new label, only 25% alcohol, trying to reach new markets. And this is vacuum distilled, which until recently was incredibly rare for the Awamori industry. And it's really interesting. It has, of course, the steamed rice. It has a little bit of the funkiness that we love about Awamori, but then it also has some fruit to it. And it also has like a touch of aniseed. There's almost like a light black licorice thing going on that you might find more commonly in Ginjo grade sake. So this is a very easy sipper and something that a lot of people would maybe mix with sparkling water or, on the rocks, no problem. Really easy to keep going with this one, and it's perfectly clear as you can see. Then moving up a little bit, the pot I showed you before, that's 30%. That's the standard style. It's been aging in clay for a number of years. and it's starting to take on some extra character. You're starting to get more of the age sweetness, and sometimes you can say that that's a little bit like a caramel, or it's a little bit like a maple syrup type of sweetness that's in there with the vanilla. It's still in there with the umami character that you would expect from mushrooms, all kind of playing together, and over time those turn into really incredible things. Then once you get into what you're drinking right now, and longer aged product, you get a more mellow, but and also sometimes a little bit sweeter, more the vanilla accent comes out a little bit more in a more assertive way. And and then there's tons of iterations therein, and beyond that. And there's so much variety. One of my favorites, and this is not for beginners, but one of my favorite brands, I wasn't planning to talk about this. This is a funk bomb, and I love it. And it's something that sometimes when I'm in Okinawa, I almost feel like I have to finish the night with this funk bomb. And I have a bottle of it, of course. It's called Shirayuti. It's not easy to find. And this is unbelievable. I believe it. I haven't been to this distillery because it's pretty far flung. I'm pretty sure, I'm certain, as is common in the shochu and awamori world, it's open fermentation for the most part. You're getting a lot of wild yeasts in there. This has all sorts of like seaweed, like the juice from a jar of green olives, and all sorts of other layers of age and fermentation in there. It is awesome. I love this stuff. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. And fortunately, I mean, probably, it's hard to find. So, but there's a ton of diversity, and I would argue that there's something for everyone there. You can get your really light, almost ginjo-esque banana and pineapple aromas from some 25% alcohol awamori that are vacuum distilled. And then you can kind of move up into the age category, where it just gets a little bit, it gets grassier, it gets mushroomier. That's now a adjective. And it keeps moving in all sorts of interesting directions. And these days the awamori industry is isolating new yeast strains. Chuko Shuzo, the distillery that we've been talking about with the pottery, with a lab that's located in Okinawa, isolated a mango yeast. So they have product that's fermented with mango yeast, mango tree yeast, and it's, as you can imagine, quite tropical. And that's another lovely accent, another new tangent for the category that, we're going to see more and more of that moving forward, I think. And I think that Aomori has a lot to brag about. They've got this hyper regionality, the community, the history, the aging, and it's a delicious unknown product. It's, as I've said many, many times, it's one of Japan's best kept secrets.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I know that sake is often used in cooking. How about awamori as well? Do people use it
You
in
know,
cooking?
I haven't seen that as much, to be fair. Um, I of course you can. Of course you can. It's just not quite as common. I think that you'd have to be careful with the alcohol content, obviously, and I don't know. I would love to be corrected on that. I would love to hear from a chef or a home cook who avidly uses Japanese spirits in their cooking. I think that'd be really cool. But yeah, I'm not aware of much of it.
Well, I know when my son got really into making Japanese food, and he's not 20 yet, and he was really worried whether he could buy mirin or cooking sake, and because he's not legal yet.
You've raised a very good
So
a very
cute.
good son.
The staff were like, "Yeah, yeah, you're fine. Take it."
That's it. It's a fair question. I
It
mean,
is
the good thing about
very
meeting is if you start drinking
majime.
it out of a cup, then you will cease and desist rather quickly, I think. But um, yeah, I think obviously the non-distilled drinks have a lot more going for them in terms of especially acidity. There's a lot more acidity in wine, of course. Sake has some acidity, never going to be really be able to compare with most wines, but it's something that, you know, you need that acidity in cooking, and because of distillation, you lose a lot of that acidity. And shochu and awamori are traditions where you're not allowed to add anything. You're not allowed to add anything to change the flavor, such as sugars or other acids. You're not allowed to add anything to change the color. I mean, you can do a little bit of, you know, barrel aging, but it has to be very limited so as not to affect the color, the hue too much. Otherwise, it's just water and time are the additives, and you don't really get any. You can't do anything more than that.
Yeah.
So without the acidity, maybe it's not quite as useful when cooking. That's just my guess.
Maybe. So that is our time. We have done an hour. Thank you so much for all the insights. If people do want to try some awamori, where would you send them? Can they find it at izakayas or?
Izakaya is a good way to go. There are lots of Okinawan izakaya around the country, in Japan anyway. And, you know, Paikaji is a famous chain of Okinawan izakaya, a lot of fun. They often have musicians who play live music. A lot of Okinawan places do. So it's a good place to make a reservation for a group. If you're in Tokyo, then Shochu Authority, not Awamori Authority, I know. Shochu Authority has a pretty good selection, as do a number of other decent liquor shops. And, you know, if you go into a place that has, you know, lots of sake fridges and maybe a little, you know, tachinomiya, a place to stand and sample stuff, that place is probably going to have some decent awamori along the lines of what you got your hands on today. The harusame kari. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. I recommend it. Outside of Japan, is there any way for people to access awamori?
You know, it's still kind of tough.
Yeah.
It really depends on where you live. You know, if you live in a major metropolitan area, then you might have some luck. And then depending on the laws for shipping product, either interstate or internationally, then, you know, I know with the whole COVID situation, some of these restrictions have been relaxed a little bit, or at least altered slightly. So it has become a little bit easier for some people, or at least people have figured out, oh, wait, I can order booze online. I should do that. And I think that's causing these products to travel a bit more than they normally would. Awamori is absolutely available in many large markets. It's just you do have to go and get it. You have to go and find it. And the number of brands available is not yet impressive.
And then sake and shochu is now being made abroad as well.
That's true.
Is there anybody abroad making awamori that you know of?
I have not heard of it yet. If somebody was making an all black koji rice fermentation and then single pot distilling it, they could basically call it a awamori. But I haven't heard of anybody doing it yet.
Well, we'll keep watching. We'll keep watching your blog and listening to your podcast and find out. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting.
You as well.
And you introduced me to one of my new favorites, I think.
The name of that product, harusame kari, as you can see on the right side of the label, kari, there in katakana. That's actually one way that they say cheers in Okinawa.
Oh,
kari,
nice.
Rather than kanpai. So that might be a good way for us to sign off.
Yeah. So let's do that. And thank you. One comment from William. William Turner says, very interesting. Thanks. I want to drink a glass of awamori now. So perfect, William. Christopher.
110% blessing right there, William.
Kari.
Kari.
Kari. Cheers. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Thanks a lot. Join us again tomorrow, 5 o'clock. We're talking Japanese news and sustainability with Hiko Simon. So please join us again. Yeah. Thanks so much, Christopher. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody. Kari.
Kari.